On a Prayer, Faith is Awaken by Elton Thomas. Episode 29, Reunited in Faith. The sun was setting over St. Louis, casting long shadows over the city as the warm hues of dusk bathed the streets in a golden glow. Dusty Rhymes stood outside a small brick building, his heart racing with anticipation. The weight of everything that had happened still lingered, but tonight, for the first time in a long time, he was filled with hope. Beside him, Megan checked her phone for what seemed like the 100th time, her expression tight with anxiety. "Do you think she's ready for this?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost hesitant. Dusty glanced at her, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I think she's been ready for a long time," he said softly, though his own heart felt heavy with the weight of the moment. Mila stood next to him, her small hand wrapped tightly around his. She looked fragile, her dark eyes wide and wary, her body still too thin from weeks of captivity. But there was something else in her eyes now, something that hadn't been there when Dusty had first found her. Hope. Hope that she would finally be reunited with the person she had longed for the most. Her mother. Dusty squeezed Mila's hand gently, offering her a reassuring smile. "It's going to be okay, Mila. You're safe now." Mila nodded, though she didn't speak. She hadn't said much since Dusty had rescued her from the high-rise. The trauma of what she had endured was still too fresh, too raw. But Dusty knew that this reunion, this moment, was the beginning of her healing. It was the moment she had been waiting for. A soft creak of the door opening pulled Dusty's attention back to the building, and his heart clenched as Maria stepped outside. Maria looked different than the last time Dusty had seen her. There was a lightness in her step, a quiet strength in her posture that hadn't been there before. Her face, lined with grief and worry for so long, now softened as her eyes locked on her daughter. Tears welled up instantly, and she pressed a hand to her mouth as a sob escaped her lips. "Mila," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. Mila's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat as she stared at her mother. For a moment, she didn't move, as if the sight of Maria standing before her was too much to believe. And then, without a word, Mila let go of Dusty's hand and ran toward her mother. Maria dropped to her knees, arms outstretched, tears streaming down her face as Mila crashed into her, wrapping her arms tightly around her mother's neck. They clung to each other, their sobs filling the quiet evening air, the weight of their separation finally lifting as they held each other for the first time in weeks. "I thought I'd lost you," Maria whispered, her voice trembling as she buried her face in Mila's hair. "I thought I'd never see you again." Mila didn't speak, but her small body trembled as she held on to her mother, her hands clutching at Maria's shirt, as if she were afraid to let go. Dusty stood back, watching the reunion with a lump in his throat. He had seen many things in his life, too many things that had broken him, too many things that had hardened his heart. But this moment, this simple act of a mother and daughter reuniting after weeks of terror and separation, was one of the most powerful things he had ever witnessed. Megan stepped closer, her eyes filled with tears as she placed a hand on Dusty's arm. "We did it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We brought her home." Dusty nodded, though his heart was still heavy. The joy of this reunion was undeniable, but there was something else, something darker that lingered in the back of his mind. "Jackson." Dusty cleared his throat, his voice low as he spoke to Maria. "There's something I need to tell you, Maria." Maria looked up, her tear-streaked face filled with confusion as she held Mila close. "What is it?" she asked, her voice shaky. Dusty hesitated, his chest tightening. "We found Jackson," he said quietly. "But somehow, he escaped." Maria's brow furrowed in confusion, her eyes darting between Dusty and Megan. "Escaped? How is that possible? After everything he's done, how could he get away?" Before Dusty could answer, Megan's phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced down at the screen, her eyes widening in disbelief as she read the message. "Dusty," she said, her voice trembling. "You're not going to believe this." Dusty's heart skipped a beat as he turned toward her, his stomach tightening with dread. What is it? Megan held up her phone, showing him the message. Jackson. He's in a jail cell. He just appeared there. Dusty's eyes widened in shock, his mind racing to comprehend what Megan was saying. What do you mean he appeared in a jail cell? How is that even possible? Megan shook her head, her expression as bewildered as his. I don't know. The police are saying he just showed up out of nowhere. They think he broke in to avoid being captured. They're laughing about it, calling him a coward. Maria's eyes flickered with disbelief as she looked at Dusty. But how? Dusty stood there in stunned silence, his mind reeling. Jackson had vanished from the high-rise. Dusty had seen it with his own eyes. One moment he was there, and the next, he was gone. And now, he had somehow reappeared in a jail cell? None of it made sense. But then again, so much of what had happened over the past few weeks hadn't made sense. The miracles, the prayers, the impossible victories. Dusty had stopped trying to understand it all. Some things, he had come to realize, couldn't be explained. They just were. Dusty took a deep breath, his mind settling as he looked at Maria, at Mila, at Megan standing beside him. Maybe we don't need to understand it, he said quietly. Maybe just knowing that Jackson is behind bars is enough. Maria stared at him for a moment, her confusion slowly giving way to a sense of acceptance. She nodded, pulling Mila closer to her as she let out a long, shaky breath. You're right, she whispered. It doesn't matter how. All that matters is that he can't hurt anyone anymore. Megan smiled, wiping away the last of her tears. Exactly. He's where he belongs. Dusty's heart swelled with a quiet sense of relief. Jackson was gone, locked away where he could no longer control, manipulate, or destroy lives. And while there was still so much Dusty didn't understand, he knew one thing for certain. They had won. As the sun continued to set, casting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Dusty, Maria, Megan, and Mila stood together in quiet reflection. The city around them buzzed with life, but in that moment, the world felt still, peaceful. The battle they had fought was over, and now they could finally begin to heal. Dusty glanced down at Mila, her small hand still wrapped tightly around her mother's. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and something else. Trust. Dusty smiled softly, nodding to her. You're safe now, Mila. You're home. Mila nodded, her eyes shining with the faintest glimmer of a smile. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Dusty believed in the power of faith, the power of miracles. Not the grand, spectacular miracles, but the quiet, simple ones. The ones that reunited families, that brought peace where there had once been only fear. Reunited in faith, they all knew that this was just the beginning.